Let's proceed with the next video from the series, installing and configuring networking in Windows Server 2016, and this is implementing DHCP. Hello friends, this is Nick from NOB Solutions, and today I'm going to speak about implementing DHCP in Windows Server 2016. So the DHCP abbreviation stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and is basically used for assigning automatic IP addresses to devices in a company. So as you know, every administrator doesn't have the time to go around and configure static IP addresses for all the devices in the environment. And would you imagine, for example, you have a guests in your company and they ask for the guest Wi-Fi, and what the administrator needs to do is he needs to go and configure a static IP addresses on every single guest device so that they can connect and start using the network, which is not really convenient. And here DHCP gives us the benefits of automatically distributing the IP addresses, the unique IP addresses in a company. So before we start with the actual demonstration, I just want to provide you some key concepts that everyone needs to know about DHCP, every administrator that is. So the first thing that most of you will have to be familiar with is how actually the DHCP lease works. And there are 4 steps when a client is presented to the network, and you can see the steps from top to bottom. And I've set the keywords with capital letters, and these are the words that you need to remember. So you will be able to represent this if, for example, you are asked. So the first thing, when you connect a client, for example, let's say a computer, to the network, the client computer will send a broadcast discover package in the subnet, and this package will look for DHCP servers. So only authorized DHCP servers will be able to respond. Of course, in some occasions, unauthorized DHCP servers or rogue servers can respond as well. So you need to be careful from where you're getting your DHCP information, because that way, if you have a DHCP rogue in your network, all the traffic can be rerouted from the rogue to the rogue server. So be careful about that. When the server, or when the discover packet hits the server will then broadcast into the network an offer packet, which contains all the information about IP addresses, MAC addresses, subnet mask addresses, any specific policy configuration rules if you have some, or the default gateway and DHCP servers if you have configured them. So after this package is sent to the client will then broadcast again on the whole subnet a request package. This request package will say, yes, I need that information, please give the information to me, and will then send this package to the network, and the server will then broadcast an acknowledgement package which will confirm that the settings for this computer are added into the DHCP database. So then when the computer is already acknowledged on the network, it will be able to communicate. So as I said, the key letters that you need to remember in this one are DORA or DORA. If you remember, then you will be good to go with the DHCP lease. So on the next slide, I've made another key concept about DHCP lease, and this is how the renewal process works. So as you know, every DHCP server has a lease time, a specific lease time configured by the administrator, and depending on this lease time, after 50% has passed, the client will then send a DHCP request packet to the server, and the server will acknowledge this packet with acknowledge packet back to the client, and this lease time will be reset from the start. So again, at 50%, the client will do the same, and if the DHCP server responds, there is a circle and the computer continues to work in the network without any interruption. But If the client fails to get this acknowledgement from the DHCP server at 50%, it will try to send another renew packet at 87.5%. And if it fails again to get an acknowledgement packet at 87.5, then the client will broadcast a discover packet. And if you remember from the previous slide, this is basically the whole DHCP discovery on the network about DHCP servers. So this is how DHCP lease renewal works. After we have some basic knowledge of what is DHCP and how the lease and lease renewal works, I'm going to deploy a DHCP server. So for this video, I'm going to use my domain controller, and you can see on the top right corner I have the BG info, and I'm going to use a client machine that we are going to then test the DHCP and confirm that it's able to pick up an address from this DHCP server. Now that I'm back on my domain controller, I'm going to install the DHCP role in here, but please remember that is not a prerequisite for you to install DHCP on your domain controller. It can be, of course, a router on your network or any other device that has DHCP functionality. And depending on how large is your environment, it's possible that you even separate the DHCP on a different dedicated server. So I'm going to start by adding roles and features on this server, and I'm going to select it, and you can see right away the DHCP server row is in here. It will require for you to add the DHCP server tools features, so I'm going to add this and I'm going to install the role. Just to add another thing, you can always use PowerShell to install the role as well, and the PowerShell command for this is add Windows feature DHCP. So as soon as I've finished installing the DHCP, I have the option to complete DHCP configuration. And if I click on this option, what it will prompt me is to authorize the DHCP server. So if you remember in the beginning, I spoke about the rogue servers on the network. So this is a great feature for you to deal with this one. So if the DHCP server is not authorized in a domain network and domain environment, it will stop functioning and it will not provide DHCP addresses to the clients. So in a domain environment, you will need to first authorize this server, and then you can continue with creating scopes and giving IP addresses to clients. And in the first description, you can see that it's always a good idea for you, if you have a big environment, to delegate DHCP server administrations to other people in the environment, depending on how many administrators are there, how many levels. So you can have DHCP administrators or DHCP users, security groups created in AD, and then you can delegate permissions through this. So I'm going to click next, and the authorization will ask me what are the credentials that I'm going to use to authorize this in AD. So if you are going to provide DHCP functionality in the whole environment that you have on an enterprise level, you will need enterprise permissions. So I have enterprise permissions with this account, so I'm going to commit the changes. And you can see that the process is fairly easy and completely done. So I'm going to close this window right there and close this one as well. So what we can do now is we can open the DHCP console, and you can see that the DHCP console has not changed from the previous versions of Windows servers. So most of the experienced administrators will be familiar with this console and they will be able to work without any problems. But for newer administrators, I'm going to show you how you can configure a DHCP scope. And what is a DHCP scope is basically a range of IP addresses that are available to be leased by the DHCP server, and they are managed by the DHCP server. So if you expand the DHCP server on the left, you'll see that you have both IPv4 and IPv6 available. So depending on your network, if you are using IPv6, you can configure a DHCP scope for IPv6. In my case, I'm only using IPv4, so I'm going to right-click on the IPv4 and create a new scope. So another wizard will appear, and I will need to name my scope first. So I'm going to say NLB main for my main scope, DHCP server. Okay, and click next. And in the next window, you will have to configure the IP address range that you want your DHCP server to give to the clients connecting to your network. So, a trick that I want to show you in here is that if you're familiar with DHCP, you have two options to reserve IP addresses. Or maybe three options. If you configure a reservation that I'm going to show you later, if you exclude a bunch of IP addresses from the DHCP scope so they can be given manually to servers, for example, or in here. So in here you have the ability to provide a range of IP addresses, and you can specify, for example, if you have a Class C network like me, I have 254 available addresses, and what I can do is, instead of giving the whole network to the DHCP server, I can start from 10, 0, 0, 100, or you can configure maybe less. Maybe you can start from 30. So the first 30 addresses will be excluded from the DHCP, and I can end, for example, on 10.0.0.200. So let me just fix the subnet mask, which is going to be a Class C subnet mask. And I had to just click on the length to become a 24-bit length. So now my DHCP server will give only these IP addresses from this range. So I'm going to click next. And this is the exclusion and delay I was talking about. So for example, if you are setting the whole available network, so let's say we start from 1. On the next field, you can reserve or exclude from giving the addresses, for example, from, let's say, from 1 to 10.00, let's say 99. So these addresses will be excluded from giving to the clients that request DHCP or an IP address, and they will be left over for static IP addresses, so you can configure them from the servers. And depending on what is your IP and network configuration and scheme, you can either reserve the beginning of a network or the end. It depends. So I'm just going to remove this one and just going to add 100. And I'm not going to add anything in here, but the subnet delay in milliseconds is the timer that your DHCP server will respond to any requests. So for example, if you have multiple DHCP servers and you want the DHCP server to respond slowly, or this DHCP server, for example, is not that reliable, you may want to increase the subnet delay in milliseconds so that your top priority DHCP servers can respond quicker. In my case, I have only one DHCP server, so I'm going to leave it as 0. And the next one is the lease duration. If you remember, the lease duration is the time that the client will be given an IP address. So after this lease has expired, this IP address will be returned to the pool of available IP addresses for giving to other users. So this is, if I can give some recommendation here, I would say that if you are configuring this on a guest network, you most probably want to lower the lease duration to, let's say, an hour, for example, because if you are having multiple customers coming in and connecting to the guest Wi-Fi, your IP addresses will run out really fast if you have this lease duration set to 8 days. So what you can do is you can just lower this count so they can be easily and faster returned to the pool. If you are going to use this in your production environment, you can configure this to be 8 hours, for example. So the client computers will connect in the morning, will get an IP address, and then in the end of the day, when the business day is over, these addresses will be returned back to the pool. In my case, I'm going to leave it as the default and click next. And the next window will ask me if I want to configure any specific DHCP options. So the DHCP options include the configuration, additional configuration that comes with the actual IP address, which can include the default gateway, for example, or any specific DNS server that you want your clients to go to DNS resolution, or any other specific things that you can have, any custom configurations in your environment. So I'm going to select yes and click next. And the first thing, it will ask me to configure the router, which is the default gateway. So in my case, my router will be 10.0.0.254. That's the last available IP address. So I'm going to give this address to the clients. So every client, when it receives an IP address, it will receive this gateway as well. The next one is the domain name and the DNS servers. So the parent domain name is noblab.com, but you can change this to any specific domain that you want to configure your DHCP server to work in. But I'm going to leave this one as the default because this is my root domain. I don't have any child domains or any other domains whatsoever. The next one is the DNS servers, and you can see that it already has picked what is the IP address of my DNS server. But if you want the clients in a specific network to connect to a specific domain controller, you can add the DNS server in here or DNS servers in here, so they will receive this IP address upon picking up the DHCP configuration. On the next window, it will ask you to configure WINS, and WINS is a older name resolution technique that was introduced before the DNS, and Microsoft still has this one, although it's quite controversial, and a lot of administrators, a lot of teachers around the web are constantly complaining why this is still in Windows Server 2016. Well, Microsoft includes this because of backwards compatibility. For example, if you have an application that requires WINS resolution, this is the way for you to configure the clients to use this application. So there is a in the near future, it's possibly that this is going to be decommissioned, but still it's here for any backward compatibility. I'm going to leave the default. I don't have any WINS, and I'm going to click next. And the last window will ask me if I want to activate the scope now. So if I click on yes, it will activate the scope, and I will click finish. So now I have already configured my scope for, which is my NLB main, for my client requests. Even though we have already configured the scope, it's always available for you to right click and go to the properties of this scope, and instead of recreating it from scratch, you can change any settings that you've pre-configured in the wizard. So you can change the start and end IP addresses, you can configure the lease duration or the description. And on the second tab, you can enable dynamic DNS updates. And what this does is, when a client picks up an IP address, an automatic record will be created by the DHCP server in the DNS for this client. So other clients will be able to resolve the host name of this the new client to the proper IP address. And the last tab is the advanced tab, where you can change what is the IP address, how is the IP address given to the clients. Is it DHCP, is it BootP, or both? And you can change the delay configuration in milliseconds. So let's close this and go real fast through the child folders, and the first one is the address pool. In here you will see the IP addresses that are available for leasing to clients. You can refresh this one from here, but if you want, you can always add an exclusion range from this one. So you can add an exclusion range. For example, let's say I don't want my 10.0.0.100 address to be given to anyone, because I know that this is going to be used for my VPN server, for example, and this address will not be allowed to be provided to clients. So the first client will pick up address 101, which we're going to test later. In here you will see the actual leases of addresses, or the actual clients that are connected to your DHCP server. So from here you can either create a reservation on the specific IP address, or you can remove this lease. So for example, if you are running out of IP addresses, what is the best way for you to free some addresses is to go into the lease folder, check for example few random IP addresses, try to ping them, and if they are not responding, you can safely delete the lease, and this will be given to other clients that are requesting this one. So the next one is reservations, and you can add manual reservations in here. You will actually need the MAC address of the client for you to be available. So if you don't know the MAC address, as I said before, you can just go to the list tab and right click on the client that you want to reserve, and it will be available for you to reserve it real fast, and that way you don't have to go ahead and find what's the actual MAC address. So the next folder is the scope options, and these are any specific scope options that you want to configure. As I said, the scope options and the server options in general can be different. So in this case, I have for scope options a specific value for the router or the default gateway. I have a specific value for DNS servers, but for example, in different scopes you can have different configurations if the scopes are listening in different networks, for example. So you don't want the DHCP server to give an IP address from different network to a computer that is not recognizing this one. And the last folder is the policies folder. In here you can configure a specific policies for the DHCP server to acknowledge clients on the network, and the policies can be different classes, or either vendor or user classes. And if you go ahead and create a new policy and just add a test name, let me just show you, you can add different conditions. So for example, the user that you want this DHCP server to give an IP address may be, for example, let's say the value that the client device is requesting needs to be equal to Microsoft Windows 2000 options, or any user class, for example. If the client is requesting an IP address from the default routing and remote access. These are different policies that you can configure that can help you to separate specific conditions that the user needs or the device needs to be, the client needs to meet any specific conditions in order for it to receive an IP address from the DHCP server. So I'm going to cancel this one, and as a last demonstration I'm going to switch to my client, and in here if I open the network and sharing center and go to properties, and I'm going to open the Internet Protocol version 4, and you can see that I have a manual static IP address assigned to this computer. But if I click on obtain IP address automatically and DNS server automatically, if I click OK and close this one, it will disconnect me for a moment. I had to reconnect real fast, but if I go into the IPv4 details, I will see that I have the 10.00.101 address, or this is the first address from the range that we've configured on the DHCP server. So on the top right side corner of the screen, you most probably see that the IP address is the old one. So I'm going to just open BGInfo and apply the settings once again, and the address will automatically and magically change to the 10.0.0.101. So if I switch to my DHCP server and go to the address leases and just refresh this one, I will see that I have the NLB-PC-01, which has the client IP address that we've pre-configured. So as I mentioned before, if I right click on this one, I can add to filter, so I can filter this computer to allow or deny DHCP to be given to it. So in the future, when if I specifically choose deny, if this computer connects to the network and requests an IP address, the DHCP server will deny this request. And as I said, I have the reservation, add to reservation, so if I click add, the list has converted into a reservation, and this is pretty much the reservation and how it looks. So you can configure any specific options, or check the properties, or even check the MAC address real fast. So this is how you can add a reservation as well. And if you want, you can always delete this one. So if this is not being used anymore and you're lacking IP addresses from your range, you can delete this one if it's not used. So you can free addresses to be given to other clients that are requesting it. So this is the first video of how you can configure DHCP in Windows Server 2016. I will create another, I think, 1 or 2 videos. I will see how we'll be able to manage the time on those, and these videos will be about how you can configure DHCP failover in Windows Server 2016 and how you can migrate DHCP server from an old DHCP to a new one. So if you like the video, you can always share and subscribe to the channel. You can always hit that like button as much as possible, and that would help the channel grow, and that would help me a lot. If you don't like the video, you can always hit the dislike button, of course, and leave a comment to say what can be improved so we can improve in the future. If you have any problems with DHCP or any specific questions, you can always put them in the comment section below, and I will try to answer them as soon as possible. This was Nick from NLB Solutions, and thank you very much for viewing, and see you soon.